Hey, first grade, let's do history lesson 30. History lesson 30. And because we are doing our narration, you need to be sitting up, ready to do some respectful listening so that you might tell back. Today's story is about Pocahontas. Our names, places, and vocabulary for this lesson are John Smith and Pocahontas. The places are not listed, but we do know that they are in or near Jamestown, Virginia, and we do not have any vocabulary for this story. So let's listen as we hear the story of Pocahontas, or at least one of a very short, I'm talking short, story. There was once a very brave man whose name was John Smith. He came to this country many years ago when there were great woods everywhere and many wild beasts and Native Americans. Many tales are told of his adventures, some of them true and some of them untrue. Among the latter is the following story. One day, when Smith was in the woods, some Native Americans came upon him and made him their prisoner. They led him to their king, and in a short time they made ready to put him to death. A large stone was brought in, and Smith was made to lie down with his head on it. Then two tall Native Americans with big clubs in their hands came forward. The king and all his great men stood around to see. The Native Americans raised their clubs. In another moment, they would fall on Smith's head. But just then a little Indian girl, a Native American, came rushing in, and she was the daughter of the king. And her name was, say it with me, Pocahontas. She ran and threw herself between Smith and the uplifted clubs. She clasped Smith's head with her arms. She laid her own head upon his. "Oh, father," she cried, "spare this man. I am sure he has done you no harm, and we ought to be his friends." The men with the clubs could not strike, for they did not want to hurt the child. The king at first did not know what to do, and then he spoke to some of his warriors, and they lifted Smith from the ground. They untied the cords from his wrists and feet and set him free. The next day, the king sent Smith home, and several Native Americans went with him to protect him from harm. After that, as long as she lived, Pocahontas was the friend of the white men, and she did a great many things to help them. All right, so there's the story of Pocahontas, at least one of she and her rescue of John Smith that we're not really sure is true or not true, but on that, here's your prompt. There was once a very brave man whose name was John Smith. Pause and do your narration. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about Pocahontas. Here is Pocahontas was very young when she met the white people who had come to America in Jamestown. Matter of fact, very young, she married one of them. His name was John Rolfe. They decided to go to England after they'd been married a couple of years. She was only maybe 19 or 20 years old when they went to England. They had a son. We're not sure where he was born, there or maybe here before they left. And so they had a son. And while she was in England, they did a picture, a sketch of her, and then later did the art for it. And this is the picture. Remember, she's only 19 or 20. They kind of make her look a little older. She has these, she's very dressed up in this crazy outfit that they used to wear. She would not have worn that growing up, of course, but when she went to visit England, they thought appropriate that she would dress as they do in England. And then an artist more recently, in the last 20 years, has kind of colorized it and maybe made it a little more what she might have looked like. Again, she's only about 20 years old when she goes to visit England. She does meet the king. We don't know exactly what they might have talked about, but she and her husband, John Rolfe, had met the king while there. And then John Rolfe wanted to go back to Virginia. Now, Pocahontas was kind of liking it in England. It was a pretty nice lifestyle. They had taken very good care of her and shown her lots of things and treated her very well, but they decided to go back. And on the ship back, she got very sick, and they landed the ship before they ever left England, and she died there. And so she was buried there. Matter of fact, John Rolfe decided to go back to Virginia, but left her. She was buried there in England and left the son with some friends as John Rolfe went back to Virginia. So that is a little more information about Pocahontas. She did a very brave thing, and we're going to talk a little bit about bravery. Matter of fact, I was thinking maybe when you guys finish listening and turn this off, that you could sit around and maybe share some stories from the Bible about bravery. And as I started to think about some very brave, and I was thinking Pocahontas was very young when this story happened. This story happened, and then the lights went out. And she was very brave, and she waved her arms. And then Pocahontas, the lights came back on for her. Wasn't that amazing? And so, but she was very young, and I started thinking in Bible stories, who was very young and very brave? And you know, the first person I thought of was David and Goliath. Do you remember the story? That he, of course, went to see his brothers, and Goliath, the giant that an entire army was afraid of, and David, just a young boy, is like, what? Let's go, Goliath. So that kind of made me think of how very brave David was. Now, David knew that he wasn't alone in that venture, and that's what he said. He goes, you're making fun of God? Well, you come at me with a big sword and a big spear and a big shield, but I come at you with God, and that's bigger than anything. So he was very brave, but he also knew that he had God. And you know what? We can be very brave too, because we know we have God. We are never alone, and we can take a risk, and trust that God will take care of you. Can you guys think of any other very brave people? Yeah, we had lots of stories. Another one that we talked often about was Moses. Remember when Moses in the burning bush, and God said, go back to Pharaoh, and he's like, but I can't even talk. I'm scared. But he did. He was brave. He was nervous and he was scared, but he was brave. That's true, because he knew he had God, right? If God tells you to do something, you better do it. And Moses did. And he was brave, and God took care of him. So we know that God takes care of us, that God has a plan for us. Can you think of any other? Well, listen, we'll stop here. We don't need to go on and on together, but maybe you guys, maybe at dinner tonight, everybody come to the dinner table with a brave story. Think of somebody in the Bible who was brave or took a chance and trusted God. Okay, so that was the story of Pocahontas. And maybe you can also talk at the dinner table a little bit about when Pocahontas went to put herself between the guys with the clubs and John Smith. How did she feel? Do you think she was afraid? And what's it like to be afraid and take a chance and put somebody in front of yourself? Okay, you guys can discuss all those things. Thank you. Love you. Goodbye. 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 La, 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 la.